what I want to do is outline the way I read it, says a theologian, and the thing I like about it is the multiple levels that it covers. You could begin by saying at one superficial level, as this book challenges the conflict between the producers and the protectors. The producers and the protectors. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. And the producers, of course, want to transform natural resources and to meet human needs and wants. They want to overcome poverty. And today, everyone talks about poverty. Economists historically have talked about scarcity. It's the same problem. And attribute all sorts of evil to scarcity. I'm reminded of Bernstein's West Side Story, where Officer Krupke, you know the song, and Krupke says, "What are you guys doing here, this gang, and what's the matter with you?" And he says, "I'm depraved on account of I'm deprived." And that's the account that many people give to the evils of the world. But some of the people who are working in the production side are actually attempt to provide jobs and fund projects and create wealth for the Commonwealth. And it's not all egoism and selfishness, though that's obviously present also. But that's the constructive intent in that school of thought. And the other side is, of course, as we've heard, to reverse the destruction of nature, to end pollution, stop disruption and the extinction of species, to slow global warming, and to save the earth from technomania. I love that word, technomania. It's from the early part of last century. And get rid of artificial civilization, as if no civilization is not artificial. Well, we can see this all over the place. You can see it in the battles. You remember the spotted owl in the lumber industry, and you remember more recently about the debates on drilling or nuclear power, or now genetically modified salmon, and whether that should be done or not, or whether you've got to protect the wild fish from these genetically engineered fish if we're going to have them at all. But they're not only causes that people have, these two moral sensitivities that people have, that it also covers their interests. So you've got causes and interests that are in debate between these two. But it's also an ideological problem about the relationship, which is mentioned just a few minutes ago, about the nature of humanity to the biophysical universe through technology. Are we in nature or are we over nature? And we are both, but in what proportion? Do we have some balance that needs to be struck or can be struck? Or if we give in to one side too much, is it impossible to fulfill the other side? Now this debate, modern debate on this topic is prompted, I think, by a kind of social factor. The industrial technological capacity to control aspects of nature has been enormously compounded in the last 2 centuries. And if you can do it, why not do it? And if you can get some beneficial results, why, that seems to confirm the right to do it. It's also doubly compounded now by our recession, where there's much less confidence in both the engineering capacities and the economic calculation of its probabilities. And yet, at the same time, because of the joblessness, there's the pressure to grow the economy, enormous pressure, jobs, jobs, jobs. You've heard that, I suppose, in the last few months. And then one way people say you have to grow jobs is to grow them green. Grow green jobs. It's still growth, but that's not what the green advocates want in this case. It's also compounded by a factor that hasn't yet been mentioned. That's the growth of the nation state as the arbiter and promoter of this kind of thing. And that's a political development that means that we've got, whether we want it or not, more centralization of the policies, at least, if not the capitalization possibilities, to either grow green or grow against green. and that has enormous political implications. I just thought I'd mention that since we're in Washington. But Nelson's argument is it's not only people's attribution of causes, and it's not only the interests that they have, it's also political ideology. It's holy wars, and there's a religious factor here. And that's what makes this interesting to someone who's a theologian. The people who hold these views, I think they're just and true, and they're people of conviction. And what is a religion? Here's something that Bob and I share, among other things, a definition of religion. It's a comprehensive worldview held by faith in part because you can't prove an ultimate worldview entirely. It's held to be true and just, by which we ought to interpret reality and do what needs to be done to change reality. So it's interesting, in the definition of religion, you have both a descriptive reality and a normative reality, and the thing is what's going on and what ought to be going on, and how do you give warrant to that ought, and whether it has to have a metaphysical anchor or not, some kind of reference point that's transcendent to the way things are. Now, these two perspectives purport to a legitimacy of their holistic views, which they say are holistic, in both their definition of reality and in their power, allocation of power to make the oughts effective. Now, notice that there's no definition of God in either one of these kinds of religions that have been sketched out by Bob, and also in first name, Steve, sorry, Steve. First time I've met him, though I've read him. No mention of God. Now, it's not necessary to have an idea of God in order to be religious. Otherwise, you'd be disqualifying Confucianism, Taoism, and parts of Orthodox Buddhism from this. But you've got to have a sense of transcendence, and that's what's resisted in these particular religions. They are secular religions, and that's a contribution Nelson has made to the vocabulary, a secular religion. We thought we had one in Marx, but it turned out not to be religion at all, just false doctrine. The truth of these secular religions is not based in revelation or in ancient wisdom, as the Eastern religions are. But it's the claim is that they are scientifically based, as Bob sketched out for us, about how things work. Science, you see, is value-free. Value-free. Well, they make normative judgments that are not value-free. And that's part of the complexity of the two positions that they talk about. That part of his work, by the way, is already evident in the two earlier books that are major writings of his. Reaching for Heaven on Earth, 1991, and a decade later, Economics as Religion from Samuelson to Chicago and Beyond, 2001. And now we have this book about to come out in 2010, a decade later. These two previous books trace the development of these worldviews in the economics profession, but it has presumptions about what policy is and what policy ought to be followed that are not scientific but are religiously held. These are identified as the dominant popular secular religion in Bob's earlier books. In this one, he focuses more on the economic, environmental religion. And he adds this other kind of point, namely that the nation state has become the adjudicator of what religion shall dominate, and we're tempted to try to develop an established religion, an established secular religion in these modes. At another level, which has already been hinted at by the previous speakers, secular religions are in fact dependent on major motifs of the Christian tradition, Judeo-Christian traditions. They all involve the notion of creation, a fall into sinfulness, a prospect for redemption or salvation, and they all view their own movement as a company of those who can be the agents of redemption. So as the socialists had the idea of the proletariat, and the capitalists had the idea of industrialists or bourgeois classes, the environmentalists have the idea of naturalists as this redeeming people. And they are all opposing each other in the economics model and trying to persuade public policy to bend against them the heretical views. Otherwise, we're going to have hell on earth. So they try to establish a theocratic regime without God. That's a good trick, a theocratic regime without God. But it would be bureaucratized, hierarchical, a new Holy Roman Empire. Bob points out in one place that we had a Reformation, maybe we need a new one. While devotees of the environmental religion oppose the economic faith and criticize the false claims of rationality, progress, and so forth. Another major theme, the Roman church model did not produce this. This is Protestantism. Think of Max Weber, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, and he has some hints in something he's written, which he wrote a long time ago, that we have to protect the natural laws. This is engendered by Protestant roots, but these two forms of secular religion borrow from that tradition, but they do not have characteristic teachings that in the sovereign God, providence in spite of sin, and a calling to do God's will in the world. Well, they have that, but it's not God's will, it's natural will, I guess, and agency. But Protestantism's influence in several stages, it's not only the Protestant ethic of capitalism or technology. Robert Merton, by the way, if you know technological and the Puritans and study of the origins of that. But it also gets traced through the intellectual history, and this is one of the contributions of the volume, the intellectual history from John Calvin through Jonathan Edwards, John Locke, to John Muir. And that's a terribly intriguing chapter, and I think a contribution in itself to understand our American historical legacy. This cluster of ideas now begins to string together, and the different levels, you can begin to see the interaction of the levels. The book gets especially interesting for a theologian on this. And one of the questions that's been mentioned before, but it has to do with creation and the definitions of creation. By the way, the dispute between the fundamentalist creationists and the new atheists, anti-theology, anti-theists, that's a boring discussion. I can't understand why it gets so much press. If I had to write a book on physics or chemistry at the level of understanding that these authors have of theology, I would be laughed out of the court. It really is not a serious challenge to any serious view. But the idea of creation does have some resonances which are not picked up by either of these secular religions. If you use the word creation, you imply that there's a creator. And that's something rather remarkable, because that means there's a source and a norm for creation for the biophysical world that is not part of the natural world itself, but is somehow natural, is transcendent to the natural. And then you begin to look and see both the possibilities from economic behavior and progress and the possibilities of having reducing the destruction of the environment, because the nature is a gift. And then you get the idea that it's not only a gift, but it's a gift to be treasured, and it's an incomplete gift, a faulty gift. because humanity is charged with the duties of having dominion. And by the way, dominion's a very tricky word in theology. It comes from dominus, which means Lord, and the way it's used in the how you shall have dominion is to treat it the way the Lord God would treat it, with loving care. It's not domination in that ordinary sense of it, of an imperialist attitude toward it. But we are charged to develop the culture by tilling the fields and naming the beasts. Naming the beasts means that you have a personal relationship to those creatures, and that you have a capacity also to command them when they're disobedient, the way God commands us. But you've got to command the beast and so forth under the watchful eye of the divine commander. That means you're under norms which you don't make up and don't construct yourself. That's the theological overtones of using the word creator. Humanity is created too with certain gifts, reason and will and affection, the capacities for these. Of course, all of them can be misplaced, and therefore we have sin and manifest in all sorts of ways. You can not only have rationality, but you can have rationalization. You not only have will, you have willfulness. You not only have caring and love and affection, but you can put your loves in the wrong, undesirable objects. And those can be mixed and compounded in various ways. But they give us the capacity to follow something of what some Calvinist theologians call the cultural mandate, to create cultures that are caring in the way that the Lord cares for humans. Well, the producer of the world sees, without God, nature as a resource for economic religion, as we have heard. And they see technology as made possible essentially by an opposable thumb and a brain that was expanded by additional proteins. They see progress and efficiency as providential, as substitute for providence. It's like the hidden hand of the economists. And it's a reward for obedience with failure as punishment, fall into poverty. They foresee the innovation that will cure disease, find new sources of energy, bioengineer the whole civilization, geoengineer the globe so it'll stop global warming, and that becomes then a manifestation from a theological standpoint of arrogance and pride, not only giftedness. Well, the preservers see nature as good creation with sinful humanity violating, raping its beauty, with ecological imperialism bringing apocalyptic possibilities and the end of the world. And we've heard about that a little more from Bob. But this is not all that Bob has argued. This is a glimpse of it, and what he's done is connect the dots between the levels so that one can see that you are dealing with a holistic problem, even if the parties don't have holistic solutions yet. What shall we make of this contribution? Well, I'm not sure sometimes in the second reading, third reading, whether to rejoice or lament. I rejoice because he's done this expose of the deep roots of the conflicts, that is a contribution to our moral and intellectual history. But I lament there's some unanswered questions, Bob, and I'm going to ask you about this. When you come to your punchline that you're in favor of libertarian environmentalism, well, what does that mean? What is the role of government in libertarian environmentalism? I presume it means freedom, maximum freedom as possible and wise with grassroots care for the habitat. I'm all in favor of that. Is that all you mean? That could be just a social adjustment that would try to deepen that. But you may have more in mind. And is it possible that you're wrong about the fact that the Christian and Judeo-Christian traditions are growing increasingly defunct? They may just be covered up, and it may be possible to exhume them and reconstitute them state them in contemporary terms in a way that is compelling. Do you think they can ever become compelling to a contemporary audience? Or is the game up on that point? And is it possible to have economic progress that is environmentally sensitive? Is there some combination? It seems to me that it would require a larger religious vision than either one of these two secular religions have. And that would be the theological task. And I'm not sure that the present crop of theologians, from whom I've just retired, are really up to that task. But the task is, the theology works over the generations, and it may be possible to nurture another generation. Well, finally, this is a global issue, and many of your examples and many of your treatment are in fact national. Of course, you're working on national policy all the time and have a good excuse for that, but can your answers begin to address the global issues? Because the economic and the ecological don't respect national boundaries anymore, and yet we think still in national boundaries and the power of the nation state. With the power of the nation state itself is compromised by the global developments. So where can we go? Now, I'm willing to wait another decade for your answer, God willing. But I want to say again, congratulations. This is a magnificent contribution to all of our thinking.